Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Harrisburg City Council. Tonight, we're not having a work session, but we're having an affordable housing workshop. It is my pleasure to introduce Mayor Papapus and Councilwoman Danielle Bowers. I will turn the meeting over now to our Councilwoman, Ms. Bowers.
Thank you, President Williams. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. As President Williams mentioned, this is an affordable housing workshop. So I think it was my very first work session after being appointed to council last October. We had a work session to discuss the Harrisburg Housing Demand Study. And as the new Building and Housing Chair for council, there was one pertinent finding that really struck me. So a major finding within the study that was conducted last year noted that over the next 5 years, there's a significant need for affordable housing in every area of the city. So I began to conduct some of my own research. I met with the mayor, and here we are this evening. So this evening we will discuss inclusionary housing, inclusionary zoning. We will learn of some best practices from neighboring municipalities, and I hope everyone has questions. We're going to reserve them for the end. But again, welcome and thank you all for joining us this evening. Mayor?
Thank you, Councilwoman Bowers. I want to say it was a great pleasure working with you to help put together this workshop this evening. I think as a city, we are all committed to working together to develop some form of inclusionary policy design for Harrisburg. And we thought a good place to start would be with a workshop and with the sharing of experiences in some of our neighboring cities. Mm-hmm. So we have presentations tonight, not only talking about national examples, but also from our neighbors in Newark and Lancaster. I wanted to start by saying that in the packets, and if members of the public didn't get a packet, there are still some up near the front where you entered, but specifically for city council members, we have what is called an inclusionary housing program design worksheet. And what I'm hoping is that each one of you will, sometime over the course of the next week, and based on contemplation of everything that is said here tonight, fill out the worksheet and submit it back to Danielle and myself so that we can begin to see if there is consensus regarding what the city should do in terms of either crafting an ordinance or crafting a policy, whether it's voluntary or involuntary. This is a very general worksheet, and it was developed by a source called the Grounded Solutions Network, which was a source that Councilwoman Bowers discovered early on in the process of researching. They have a wonderfully informative website. It's groundedsolutions.org, and it's noted on the worksheet. And it's going to ask basic questions, such as, do we want a mandatory program or a voluntary program? Should it cover the entire city, or should it be targeted? Should it apply to just home ownership, or should it also apply to rental units? What's the threshold or project size that we're looking to use as a sort of triggering size for any type of potential inclusionary zoning ordinance? What is the percentage of affordable units that we're looking for in such a project? How should affordability be measured? How long should this exist? And it goes on with some good questions. So I think if we all give this some thought, that will form a good basis point for the drafting of whatever policy we see fit. And before we introduce our guests, I thought it might be helpful to start with a very brief general video. This is also from the groundedsolutions.org website, but it just talks about what is our topic tonight, i.e. inclusionary housing. So allow us to play this video.
Cities are rebounding all across the country after struggling for decades to attract new investment. Yet in nearly every corner of America, communities are concerned with what seems to be a growing crisis. How do we make sure that people of all incomes share in the benefits of development and growth? Millions of people worked hard to make our cities better, and we invested billions of tax dollars to improve struggling neighborhoods. It worked, but one result is housing prices are rising rapidly. Many people who work so hard to make our cities places we want to live can no longer afford to live in them. This pattern is not going to change on its own, so more and more communities are consciously promoting mixed-income development through inclusionary housing programs. These inclusionary policies require builders of market-rate housing to include some units the local workforce own or rent. Here's how it works. Imagine a developer is building a 100-unit apartment building. The local inclusionary housing ordinance requires 15 of the new apartments to be rented to lower or middle-income residents. 15 homes won't solve the housing crisis, but over time, as whole neighborhoods redevelop, inclusionary policies create more economically integrated neighborhoods. Providing affordable housing in market-rate buildings might reduce a building's profitability, but research shows modest inclusionary requirements don't result in higher rents or less development. Inclusionary housing is rapidly becoming a common part of the housing landscape. Over 500 communities have adopted local policies. It's working in big cities, small cities, and suburban communities across the country. It works best in places with healthy housing markets, development, and rising costs. Inclusionary housing won't meet all our affordable housing needs. It's not likely to ever eliminate the demand for federal affordable housing subsidies. But as affordable housing becomes more and more critical, adopting an inclusionary housing policy is one thing local communities can do to make a real difference.
I thought that would set the stage a little bit for us this evening. And again, we can bring the graphic up from also from their website. It's an interesting graphic, but it basically frames the discussion whenever you're attempting to come up with a policy design, things to think about, the requirements, how the program is structured, what the incentives will be, what the applicability of the program will be, and potentially what are the alternatives to other types of programs. These are all the things that we can touch on a little bit tonight in the Q&A, and as I say, we've assembled experts from throughout the region to come and talk a little bit to us. But I thought it would be appropriate to start with a presentation from the city's Law Bureau, perhaps focusing a little bit on what may or may not be achievable in their eyes in terms of legislation. So we're going to start by handing the program over to City Solicitor Neil Grover.
Thank you, Mayor. Everyone, I think, here who's had to deal with the problems that face any city, and particularly Harrisburg, know that housing is an issue every day for many people, and it's that way for many reasons. The reading that I have done, and there is a lot of legal scholarship at the moment that's going on all over the country in law schools, is that, there are a lot of different approaches. And it basically recommends at the end of the day, you've got to find the approach that fits the needs of the particular community you're in. But there are plainly some legal parameters. Back in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled that there wasn't a federal constitutional right to affordable housing. And with that stepped in a lot of state legislatures, a lot of local governments to sort of say, if it's not a federal right, is it partly what's guaranteed under our state constitutions? And from that, a variety of programs have come up. Some have done really well, some have done poorly, some have been challenged and knocked out. All of those things are sort of just an ongoing dialogue that's gone over for almost 50 years from the time the Supreme Court issued that opinion. There doesn't seem to be an absolute right way, but there certainly seems to be things you need to take into account. What a local government has to take into account, it is most likely going to involve some questions about zoning, whether it's citywide zoning, whether it's neighborhood-related zoning, but you're going to have to address it in a zoning code. You can overreach and have it thrown out because it became a taking, de facto taking, an eminent domain of people's rights and properties, because when they invested in the property originally, they did not have, this wasn't on the books, and suddenly you're telling them they have to change their business model to satisfy what you're doing. So there's careful things that have to be taken into consideration, but it's plainly something that is doable under Pennsylvania law. And I think it's doable in Harrisburg. But you can do it in stages. And that's part of the design problem you have to talk about. Do you start with the study you had last year, and do you start with a focused zoning question for a neighborhood or multiple neighborhoods in the city? Do you start with identifying funding sources? Do you start with defining newer construction or existing housing stock? There's all those things can come into the equation, and it looks like people have tried all of those formulas around the country, one after the other in a design. There are incentives that some municipalities had. Obviously, you need economics or abatement. We have an abatement program, but the abatement program, I don't think, at least as I recall, as its structure, didn't start out with the thinking of it being a affordable housing tax abatement program. Tax abatement programs in Pennsylvania are regulated by state law. So if you were doing anything on an abatement side, you would have to figure out how to make it fit that portion of the tax law. We have some fairly dated ordinances related to housing, which probably have to be revisited at some point anyway. We have different definitions at the time of how many adults, for example, can be in one building of one size that are unrelated. And the definitions of that have changed dramatically over the years. Those were attempted to, as I read them, to stop boarding houses, but in reality, it didn't stop boarding houses. Boarding houses proliferate throughout the city. So, if the ordinance isn't working, perhaps it's time to take this opportunity and clean that up as part of this program. We have talked, I think, individually and then sometimes in groups on things like Airbnbs and rental options for people. Those can be part of the same discussion in a design, and it can be part of while you're talking about whether and how to allow that or not allow that in a municipality. Affordable housing fits into that definition. Why are people going to short-term rentals for housing, in the city of Harrisburg? Can you get data on who's using it? Can you get data on, what the economics of those are? Does that satisfy one of the needs that you're trying to address already, and therefore you can address another need? That kind of information is part of, I think, the analysis that goes into a design. When you create requirements, you have to basically take all sides into consideration. You got to take into the property owner has rights. Once we get into a multi-unit building, tenants certainly have rights under federal and state law for fair housing. And those have to be factored in, that you're not usurping what's already there, that the state or the federal government laid down about housing. So it's any program's got to be a thoughtful piece, but the wheel doesn't have to be reinvented. I think the study last year was a good start on data points that lets you start moving forward on what you need. But it's real work for people to get together, use that, and then apply it based on what our ordinances are. And I would suggest, as we dive in, there's probably some of our ordinances are already helpful. They're just not really being looked at from the lens of affordable housing or inclusionary housing. And the question is, when you fit them into definitions, is some of that already there, and gives you options? It's always faster if you can use the law you already have on the books that was already applying to people to get you from point A to point B. That can't be the whole solution, but it can help start the solution. This is a subject that I think has a lot of people with much more expertise than myself here tonight, and I'm happy to answer questions as you go on. But I think I will give the lawyer's answer that it's always the lawyer's answer. What you do and what you can do, it just depends. So so what you want to do and how you get there, it will depend how to do it. It's important to identify the goal, and then when you know the goal, it's easier to identify the how in terms of the law. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grover. And again, I'll plug our worksheets. I think the worksheets, once we've had a chance to digest them and fill them out, I'll be filling one out as well, will help guide the Law Bureau in terms of determining whether there is a consensus among the elected officials as to how to move forward. But I would now like to welcome Dr. Beckett Camarada, if she can come forward. Dr. Beckett Camarada teaches in the Penn State Harrisburg Master's Program in Public Administration. She is a widely published author and a former chief financial officer in the Commonwealth of Virginia, so eminently qualified. and has been overseeing coursework by students who have already reported in some capacity to City Council, but we have many distinguished housing developers throughout Harrisburg present here that haven't seen any part of this presentation. So, Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Papenfuss, President Williams, and members of City Council. We appreciate the opportunity to give our presentation this evening. Our Penn State Harrisburg MPA capstone students were very interested in researching this very timely topic, and especially working with city officials to collect the data. And they will be presenting the results of their research tonight to you. And they're going to, each student is going to give a presentation, so it won't be one student, it'll be several students presenting. So I'm going to turn it over to them.
Can y'all hear me?
You should go to the mic anyway, just so you're be recorded.
It's gonna be 9 of us, so it might be. Okay, so I'm Candace Rutherford. I'm one of 9 of our presenters here. So we're the capstone course for the MPA program. So most of us are going to be graduating on Saturday. So we had a semester-long project working with City Council on affordable housing. So they've already seen it. So I hope you guys thought up some new questions for us. So with that being said, do you guys want to introduce yourselves? But all right, let's move it along. Okay. So if you want to slip to the next one. So this is just a brief introduction. You guys know the issue of affordable housing in the city. The city is growing. We need more affordable housing options. So this semester, we did a lot of research, a semester-long project to come up with some suggestions for Harrisburg. So this presentation is just going to be a brief overview of that. We'll do a little bit of background. We'll do our research method, as well as the findings and the conclusions that we drew from that. So with that being said, Elise will tell you guys about the background.
So going into this project, we realized that affordable housing is multifaceted. There are many factors to consider, and when looking at policy, one of those factors was gentrification. What can we do to maintain the community within the city to not price people out? Then there's urban blight. The city of Harrisburg has quite a bit of blight. When we look at policy, what can combat that blight? Increased commute times. Something we are even interested in looking at, is there affordable housing near mass transit stops? Can people get to where they need to be to have, I guess what you would say, a convenient commute to work? Citizens moving to the suburbs. We want people to come into Harrisburg. So when we look at affordable housing policies, what is going to draw people to Harrisburg? What's going to make it attractive? Code violations. What are landlords doing? We were just speaking of how many people are actually living in a building, how many people are living in units, looking at that. And then increasing rent without increasing affordable housing units. When we looked at the report, we saw that a large percentage of the units within the city are at market value. Low percentage of affordable housing. So what can we do to increase these units without increasing the rent?
So with the time constraint that we had, we thought it was best to use a structured literature review approach with a 3-aim focus to synthesize affordable housing incentives and policies from our chosen capital cities, to identify areas of improvement for increased affordable housing in Harrisburg, and to recommend some options. We collected data from a variety of sources, from government reports, from government websites, peer-reviewed journals, the Census Bureau Fact Finder, just to get a really good understanding of what the capital cities were doing for comparison. And we had criteria for choosing our capital cities. They were population size, poverty rates, racial demographics in the Northeast, and capital city. And after our analysis, we chose Albany, New York, and Annapolis, Maryland, to compare for Harrisburg.
The research question that we come up with for the paper is as follows. So we look at 2 different cities, and we are trying to see whether they have incentive that could be applicable to Harrisburg. And based on that research question, we come up with 2 different hypotheses. And the first one is we try to look whether there's an association between policies and number of affordable housing, meaning that if a policy is adopted, we wanted to see whether that encourage some form of, or encourage, a city or Albany to come up with more affordable housing for low-income people. And the second hypothesis is we wanted to see whether there's an association between housing policies and willingness of investors to build more affordable housing. But you also see we have 2 null hypotheses. So for those of you who are not comfortable with statistics, we are not trying to prove the hypothesis itself. So we come up with a null, and based on the initiative that we have, we wanted to see if there's any association. So if there's a positive association, then we say, well, the null, we can sort of, accept the null, not the hypothesis itself. So if there's no association, then we will say we can reject the null. So I don't know if you guys are comfortable with statistics. So if you have more questions, you can also ask after the presentation.
All right, right here we have some general background information for the city of Albany, New York. Roughly the population is around 100,000. About 12% of the individuals within that city are below the state's poverty line. The median household income is roughly $44,000, and the average house price is around $200,000. The demographics of the city are mostly white, but there are strong, large minority populations of both Black and Hispanic citizens. Why we selected Albany, New York? Well, there's 2 strong reasons. One, they met several of our criteria. It is a northeastern capital city with a similar history to Harrisburg. They have the same historical backgrounds in terms of deindustrialization and both being Rust Belt cities. We also chose Albany, New York because our clients had asked us to review some of the policies that Albany had put forth.
Okay, so a couple of key findings we found with Albany were that the city applied for a program with the Federal Home Loan Bank of New York, and they needed a sponsor financial institution, and they chose M&T to be their sponsor, and they were able to obtain funds for housing programs, which was very beneficial for them. In addition, they came up with a 3-tier housing system for affordable housing units. So you had, I believe it was for your poorest or lowest income brackets, that your middle income bracket, and then moderate income. Increased licensing and training opportunities was also something that Albany looked at doing to increase their affordable housing stock, whether it's folks who are contractors working on properties within the city, cutting red tape and providing more opportunities for more folks to work in the city limits. And then landlord education materials we found may have been beneficial as well for Albany to increase their affordable housing stock. Some landlords feel that if they rent to lower income folks, that they may have a riskier investment by doing so, but by providing materials and educating them, and that really everybody is a good member in the city and to be a good tenant. So those are some of the key findings we had for Albany.
So our second city was Annapolis, Maryland, and the population was 39,000. So 9.9% of the population lived below the poverty line, and the median household income was 72,000. with the median housing value of $377,000. So again, small city, mid-Atlantic region, impossible to find two cities with exactly the same circumstances, but we try to find comparable in size, also with some migration and some other factors that could be shared with Harrisburg.
Okay. So Annapolis has one main program that's actually focused at middle income people. It's called the moderately priced dwelling units. And this program can be for both rentals and for home ownership as well. So basically developers who build 10 or more units have to have a certain percentage of their units allocated for moderate income families, and that's based on the greater Baltimore region. So 6% of the rental units must be designated as MPDU, and 12% of for sale units must be designated for MPDU. And this can both encompass rehabilitation of current or old housing units or the development of units from scratch. And so far to date, the city has built 23 MPDUs, and 4 have been new, and 19 have been rehabilitated units. There is an option for developers to opt out of the program. If developers opt out of the program, they are required to pay about 4% of the building costs to the Home Ownership Assistance Trust Fund. And that fund is used to help individuals in Annapolis to buy homes, and the money can be allocated for different parts of the home buying process.
So I'm surprised no one complained so far about the size. Can you make it smaller? So
It's an ongoing issue.
It is, okay. I thought people weren't paying attention. So this is the last slide, and I assume because no one asked questions, there will be no questions so far. So these are the recommendations. Take what you want, leave what you don't want. 5 main recommendations. One of them is actually an action, and 4 are policy suggestions. So number 1, we spoke about the program, the Federal Home Loan of New York, which is basically a federal program, a grant for city developments. We made suggestions in the paper that the city apply. We heard that the city previously applied, but they were denied. So we said the application has to be perfect, basically, to get into the final competition. It's once a year competition, and it's cities from all over the place, basically. So moving to the other main recommendations, number 2 and number 3 go together. Basically, invest in your city, invest in your underemployed city, train your people, provide professional license, we suggested. One of the problem, and the reason I said 2 and 3 go together, because it's very hard to get licensed professional people to do business in Harrisburg. License issue and the city requirements, for some reason, they would go anywhere else but in the city. So that's why we said that's a good recommendation, and we saw Albany did the same thing by improving, providing more exams, more licenses from other municipalities that we accept as a city of Harrisburg. This way, there are more laborers, more workforce in the area, preferably if they're from our city, which is number 2. Number 2 and 3 go together, will provide more easier labor to the people, to the investors, and as a result will provide more affordable housing. Number 4, and it's, what do you mean? Number 4 is improve permit process. One of the issue also is permit process, or talking to the city. I myself spend an hour, I keep giving the example in every presentation, spend an hour waiting for the permit person, for the code enforcer, just to talk to me. We said improve the process. One of the suggestions was do an online application where someone can apply for the permit online, can pick the appointment that he or she wants, and then have the inspector go in that time without even me coming if I don't need to. Number 5, which is, I don't know how much it applies to Harrisburg, but we saw in other cities that many investors refuse, many landlords refuse to rent to low-income people, Section 8 and other programs. And just in case, I personally, as a city of Harrisburg resident, I don't think it applies to Harrisburg that much, but just in case, if it does, improving that, preventing that from happening will allow more housing for low income, and as a result, will provide more affordable housing options too. It goes together on the same time. Do we have any question? Going once, going twice.
I think, yeah. I think we may hold the questions until after all the presentations, if that's all right. Yeah, hopefully you're going to stick around, and then we can have a larger group conversation. And we are also fortunate here, as I indicated, to have guests here from Lancaster and York. So I'd like to bring up Ms. Shelby Nauman and Ms. Miriam Soto, both of whom are with LHOP, which is the Lancaster Housing Opportunity Partnership.
Thanks,
and I think they can speak to what's going on in Lancaster and the region.
Thanks
Yes.
for inviting us. It's
Sure.
great to be here with you guys. And I wanted to follow up just because we're following you guys. We have the Housing Equality and Equity Institute as part of our organization. I'm not going to touch on it, but it sort of relates to your number 5. So if there's an opportunity to talk after, we can do that. As the mayor said, I'm Shelby Nauman. I'm here with our director of lending and really the maestro of the LIFT program that we're going to focus on, Miriam Soto, who's our director of lending. And Miriam and our CEO, Ray D'Agostino, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, really lead the local housing investment fund and trust. I also wanted to mention that we have somebody from our LIFT loan committee here tonight, Jennifer Wintermeyer. Thanks for being here, with the Tri-County Community Action Program. We appreciate you coming to Lancaster every once in a while to help us, Jennifer. Thank you. How do I advance slides? Are you
just tell me?
Okay, great. Next slide, please. So we were created in 1994, so we're in our 25th year, which is a big deal for us. You can see our vision is a healthy and vibrant community, ensuring housing choices for everyone. Our mission is to cultivate partnerships, emphasis on partnerships and resources to increase the availability of quality, fair, and affordable housing. And we are a certified CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. Next slide. I'm going to just touch on everything that we do, but really we're focusing tonight on the LIFT program. So we help people access and create fair and affordable housing through lending, both in home ownership and rental. Miriam has 5 people under her, and we work in Lancaster and York to provide home ownership classes. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me back there?
Doing a good job.
Oh, okay. Down payment assistance to folks who would otherwise have barriers to get to entering into their first home. In the advocacy area, we advocate around housing affordability and fair housing and lending. We have a neighborhood-driven revitalization project that we lead called So We in the southwest area of Lancaster City. In Lancaster, we kind of think of our neighborhoods in quadrants. And I know you have some Elm Street programs here and things like that, so a similar program funded by the Wells Fargo Regional Foundation. And then education, which is the home buyer trainings, renter advantage courses, which we're starting this summer, and fair housing and lending. Next slide. So far, we've provided over $11 million in down payment assistance loans to over 2,000 first-time home buyers, and our program is Lancaster County and Lancaster City. And we've invested over $7 million in loans to create and preserve over 900 units of affordable housing to date. So the LIFT loan fund is really what we're here to talk about. It's a revolving loan fund, and we attract investment from the community in the form of tax-deductible and Community Reinvestment Act, CRA credits. Although our home base is in Lancaster and York, where we have offices, this program is in an 8-county region, and it provides flexible and below-market financing for affordable housing and mixed use. And I'm just going to skip over this next slide. So what type of activities do we finance? Pre-development costs, and Miriam will give you some examples of folks that we've worked with to really tailor this program. Bridge loans, gap closing to developers for construction, including LIHTC projects, construction of new or rehabilitation of existing structures into affordable or for sale rental housing, physical improvements, acquisition, and support for mixed income multifamily housing developments. And with that, I'm going to toss it to the maestro of the LIFT program.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So we're excited to be here. Again, thank you for allowing us this opportunity to talk a little bit more about our LIFT program. So the slide that we're looking at right now is really going to showcase one of our programs, which is line of credit that we actually offer to usually nonprofit agencies that are looking to have nimble money. Oftentimes what we find is that the properties that come up for sale, they have a short window on the market. And what we find that when that happens, perhaps a person that does have the cash on hand may not have the best interest of that community or that area that, for growth and for the individual that's probably going to be renting that property. And so they're focused on just capturing the property, renting it out, and maybe not putting a lot of work into the property. And so what we decided to do was come up with a program, a line of credit that really is nimble and that helps support some of our local nonprofits that are doing the work already. But they need that fast cash on hand to be able to negotiate on that property. And I'll give you an example further on. In fact, I think it's a very next slide. So if you could see here very quickly, I'm sorry, if you just go back, just a slide. Okay, so the line of credit could be up to $300,000. That gives you a lot of buying flexible power when you think about trying to get these properties, rehab them, and get them off the markets for resale. Because really this is to be used for resale, rehab resale. And that's what we're really concentrating on with some of these properties. The interest rate, again, very low, flexible dollars, 3.25, you can't beat that. Also, what we're looking at is how fast can they turn this property around, and also how much investment. We only ask for 10% of their funds, and we'll actually fund the rest, the 90% of the project. Again, we're trying to be very, look at the market that we're serving and be as flexible. That's what, and I think Jennifer would say this, that we always are looking to be flexible and meet the market demand with the products that we're creating and always tweaking just a little bit. The other component is that we are looking for first liens unless the property is controlled right now because of blight by the local government, the redevelopment authority, if you will. And we know that oftentimes you can't put a lien on those properties, so we'll work around that. We always do. If you give me the next slide, please. So this is a great example. The Spanish American Civic Association, SACA, if you will, we have given them up to $300,000 line of credit. And I think later on we're going to see a slide with how many houses have we been able to turn around with the use of these funds. So again, this is a nonprofit. They've been around longer than we have, but this really gives them some buying power, some capacity to get some of those properties in their concentrated area, because they are focused in a very small micro area of the city of Lancaster that has had challenges. And they want to turn the housing stock. They had a high rental rate in that area, and they wanted to mix it up just a little bit more, have some housing that's being purchased and also rented. Renting is important, but also purchasing and being able to put these properties back on the market is very critical to turning a community around, and especially an area. If you take me to the next slide. Okay, Impact Missions is another, this is a faith-based organization, and we were able to work with them from inception. In other words, we didn't just give them the money and say, here you go. We actually did some of the, we worked with them in tangent with them to be able to get them to a capacity where they can really understand how to be effective with these dollars, rehab the properties, put them back on the market. There was a little bit of growing pain with that, but now they're solo. They're just using our line of credit. At first, we were purchasing and together with them, giving them the rehab dollars and managing the project. They are now solo. As of what, last year, Jennifer, you would say? As of last year. So this property was actually on Marshall Street. I think it was one of the first properties that we purchased about 4 or 5 years ago now. It was before my time with LHOP, so I apologize. But what happened here, this house was in the foreclosure process. The bank understood they're not going to get anything for this house. You can see the condition. So they offered it to us, from my understanding, for pennies on the dollar. We purchased it. We worked with Impact Missions to rehab it, and we sold it to a first-time home buyer that also utilized our closing cost assistance program. This is a great example of how two programs can come together for the benefit of the good of a community. So if you just hit the next button, this is the finished product. Wouldn't you want to live there? Awesome outcome to what was before. And if you hit the slide one more time, this is the staff, the group of Impact Missions, along with the homeowner and our director, Ray D'Agostino, which of course can't be here tonight. Next slide, please. This is Paxton Place, and we couldn't come to Harrisburg and not showcase a Harrisburg project. So Paxton Place is a LIHTC project, 37 apartment, ranging from 62 and older. 18 apartments will be made affordable for prospective tenants earning 60%. So one of the key things that we want to look at is also the blending of income levels for the not just 100% or 80% or 50%, but really making sure that we're focusing on blending those income levels with the products and services that we're offering. So we were able, one of the things that happened with Paxton Place, they came to us, and we always know that there's going to be a gap. We want to be able to give those funds for gap, but it was not going to put us in the strongest position possible. So we were able to negotiate with investors that came in and say, hey, we need CRA credits. If we invest in your fund, can we get on this project? And we were able to do that. We were able to bring more capital to the table, get investment dollars, a bank is getting CRA credits, and we are actually building affordable housing in Harrisburg. So this is the beauty of being nimble, flexible, and understanding how to put projects together. Next slide, please. This is a great example of how just your local resources, the connections that you have in the community. These brothers, in fact, the Hillier Properties LLC, they're two brothers, and they were brought to our attention. In fact, I knew them because I sat on the Redevelopment Authority, so I just knew them. They're always there at the meetings. But they were introduced to LHOP through another agency, another faith-based agency, East Chestnut Ministries, and they brought them to our attention. They were already doing the good work. So why not help someone that's already doing the great work on the low key? And we said, okay, here's some additional dollars to do more of the work that you're doing. So this was a property on Prince Street. You can see there at the front. The housing was deplorable. It was terrible. All major systems needed to be replaced. So we were able to give them incentives to go to do this loan. And the house was dedicated for homelessness efforts in the city of Lancaster. Again, trying to be nimble, try to be flexible, and try to work with all the types of individuals that live and reside in our community. Next slide, please. And this is the Denver House Project. And this is in Denver, and this is something they're really extremely proud about. This property, again, deplorable. It was a boarding house. It was a building that was there, I guess, before the town even was established. But what ended up happening was that the bank was losing a lot of dollars. They said, you know what, we're going to make this work. So we had a conversation. We were able to enter into communication with a new agency, Real Life Community Services was already doing great work, but they were not in the housing industry. So we were able to mentor them through the process. So we gave them bridge financing, and then we were able to convert that to permanent financing. And they have raised, I'm not even quite sure anymore how much they've raised, but millions of dollars to go into this project. Jennifer, you may remember this. And so the property is going to be first for commercial 10 units on the top, affordable housing, all bells and whistles. We took the blight out of the town. It's become a focal point for that small borough. And they were able to raise capital in about 18 months to make this project work. So again, when people come together to have conversation, you have nimble financing, and you have conversation, great things can happen. This is great examples of those. There is going to be a health clinic on the first floor, by the way. I don't want to forget that, because it is a wraparound service building. Next, please. The House to Home program is a new program, and the intent of this program is to really do flips for investors. So you have the ability to access capital. You put a small amount of money down. We will give you up to 80%. You're able to turn that property around, and if you can do that in 6 months from beginning to end, and you sell it, then that's what we want to have happen in some of the communities that we're serving. So this is really working in together with like the SOE area, where we have a high rental percentage. We want to make sure that we're balancing that out. So this is incentivizing investors to go into that area, purchase properties, and put them back onto the market for resale. And again, these dollars are at 3%. So again, it's really to incentivize growth in an area that has 60% rental versus home ownership. Next, please. And so if you're interested, I actually have handouts of the PowerPoint. I made 40 copies. I'm going to leave them here, I guess, on this table. I don't know what else to do, but I'll put them on this table. Does that make fair? Okay, it has term sheets with the PowerPoint. And all you need to do is send me an email. I can send you an application. There is performance that we're looking for. We do have an internal committee. In fact, we have a meeting tomorrow. Anything below 50,000, me, Shelby, Ray D'Agostino, and our controller have the ability to approve. Anything above that amount, we have to take it to the LIFT committee for their blessing and for their review. So we do have a committee. We meet once a month. We're always bringing projects. We don't want to just do projects in Lancaster. We want to do them in central Pennsylvania. We want to spread the wealth and the work that we do across the 8 counties that we serve. Next, please. Okay, so if we are a nonprofit organization, 501c3, we do get donations. We do offer CRA credits for the work we do. When an investor invests with us, they don't just get credit for the one project that they were able to fund. If we use those dollars for that particular project, they actually get credit for all of the projects that we do from a year-to-year perspective. Our loan fund is, well, it's hedging up there on $6 million now. We're proud to say that. And we are about 60% deployed, but we're always bringing money back in so that we can always give money out. Next, please. And these are some of our investors, or all of our investors, and some of them do serve on the committee. They have a voice on our committee, so we're not just nonprofits that are voicing our opinion. We also have bankers that are present. And we're always tweaking our policies to make sure that we are with the market and what the market needs. In fact, we just updated our loan policies. We went through about 2 months, 3 months of reviewing our policies to make sure that we're being always creative and at the cutting edge of what the community needs as far as loan products. And Fulton Bank, and I don't know why that popped up at the end, but okay. I don't know what happened there. Next, I think that is our last slide, by the way. And then if you're interested, please feel free to give us a call, send us an email. I'll have packed information here, and I'll open it up if you have any questions when we're ready to have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was very informative. We only have one more presenter, and then we will open it up for questions. And I want to welcome up Mr. Craig Wolf, who is the Director of Community Development for the YMCA in York. And I believe, is Jamie and Harvey here? There he is. I want to also acknowledge our own Jamie and Harvey from our Camp Curtin YMCA, which is also focused on affordable housing. But for the purposes of tonight, we wanted to share experiences from around the region and we will hand things over to Mr. Wolf. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and members of council, and it's great to see my esteemed colleague, Jamie and Harvey, the Executive Director of the Harrisburg Camp Curtin YMCA. Jamie and I have been talking about a lot of these housing issues and things for a number of years now, and it's exciting to see the way that things are developing. I also want to introduce one of my Y Community Development Corporation board members, Ken Brueggemann, who came along with me this evening. So I'm going to really tell you more of this is going to be more of a story. It's going to be the story of what's taken place in Newark in terms of the YMCA and the corporation that we began called the Y Community Development Corporation over the course of about the last 25 years. And I have to say that all of what I'm going to say and show you in terms of our neighborhood revitalization and neighborhood development couldn't have been done without New York City Council and the Mayor's Office. And we've worked now, we're on our 4th administration of working with affordable housing, first starting with Mayor Charlie Robertson and then Mayor John Brenner, Mayor Kim Bracey, and now with Mayor Michael Helfrich. And they've been always been extremely supportive of us and of other nonprofits doing housing work in Newark. And so, if you can go on to the next slide there. This is the downtown Newark YMCA, and when myself and our president Larry Richardson came to the Y back in 1994, and then I followed in 1995, we found that the neighborhoods surrounding the YMCA were in great disrepair. There's a lot of disinvestment. There were right across the street from the Y, across this way, there were crack houses and boarding homes that had drugs. We could look out from our child care center and see drug deals going down. I mean, it was really bad. And we knew very quickly that somebody needed to do something. But then we were like, well, who's going to do it? And we ended up looking in the mirror, and we were the only ones that we saw in the mirror to do something. So being YMCA guys, we weren't really familiar with a lot of what needed to be done in housing, neighborhood revitalization, but hey, you can learn. And so we set off on a mission to start community development. This is the way that we define community development. It's the intentional act of producing assets that improve the quality of life of neighborhood residents, and that's taken from the Brookings Institution. We want to do things that increase the quality of life for neighborhoods and for people that live in those neighborhoods. So we decided, we didn't know where to start. We didn't know what to do. We were rookies, but we knew we had to do something. And we started by taking a trip to our YMCA partner in South America in Valparaiso. And we were just amazed at the different kinds of work that they were doing in the neighborhoods surrounding of Valparaiso. And I could do a whole presentation on that, but we came back inspired to do something. And we started, being Y guys, we looked at, how can we build a philosophical and practical approach to what we want to do in the neighborhoods. And so we started looking at, if you didn't know it, it's the first redevelopment project in history. It's the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. So we went back and looked at the book of Nehemiah. And in Nehemiah 1, you can see the people were looking around and they could see the disrepair. They could see how everything was in ruin, and they thought, how in the world what are we going to do? What can we do? And they were praying and fasting and trying to figure it out. And so you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall. So this is somebody talking who's like 700 miles away. Came back, organized themselves, started developing partners, because projects like this and changing neighborhoods, changing cities doesn't happen by yourself. You have to build relationships. You have to build partnerships next to him, next to them, next to them. You got to get with all of these. You got to look at your data and your research. You got to get with people from LHOP and all the different programs that are out there, and you have to work together in a direction. There's going to be people who are going to ridicule, like, that's never going to work. We've never done it that way. Can't happen. But they continued, and in 52 days the wall was built. Well, it's going to probably take a little bit longer than that. I mean, we've been working in Newark now for 25 years, and we're just scratching the surface in the neighborhoods around the Y, but that's what they did. And so the other component that I don't want to leave out is the social and economic development that has to take place. You can't just talk about housing. You have to talk about what you're going to, the supportive services that you're going to provide, the activities that you're going to provide for the kids, the education that you can provide to, you know, what it means to be a homeowner, what it means to be a good renter. And you have to surround folks with more than just going in and doing a project and then leaving. So I go back to the why. We decided to start with our men's residence. We have, our YMCA was built in 1925, and from the third floor up is rooms for homeless men. Well, before it was just like a hotel for poor people, and it was in such disrepair, I was embarrassed to have anybody go there. So we started off using the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency low-income housing tax credit program, and did a $5.5 million renovation to the men's residence, and now we have 120 rooms for homeless men. Homeless men by HUD's definition. We have 6 emergency shelter rooms, 69 rooms that have a 50% median income limit, and then 45 Section 8, project-based Section 8 rooms. So we did that first, and then we started looking out into the neighborhoods around the Y. This is Market Street, adjacent to the Y. We started acquiring the absolute worst buildings in the 2 blocks of the second, third, 200 and 300 blocks of West Market Street. There were peep shows, porn shops, and we'll take them. We did. I mean, we just got, we had to get a couple of nuisance bars out, which is a whole other process. I mean, I could talk about a lot of this stuff that goes on. But this is just one example of what we call our SMB project, Spirit, Mind, and Body. We've got to get the YMCA triangle in there somewhere. And this is the renovation that we did. You'll notice that it also had some commercial space. Then we moved into a neighborhood called the historic Fairmount neighborhood, near where the baseball stadium is now, kind of a block west of there, that the city asked us, since we had done one tax credit project, or 2, with the one on Market Street. And so we started acquiring blighted properties all up and down this block, again, with low-income housing tax credits. So this building became, after the renovation, you'll see, go ahead, now to the right. And so that was one of our buildings. You'll see that the building adjacent, we weren't able to, first of all, acquire and get into the project, but working with our partners with Habitat for Humanity, we were able to eventually acquire that property and have it redone by another organization, and also that was sold. This was the place, the home where the mayor of York lived in the 1940s, and it was a burned out shell when we acquired it. But through this project, then we were able to change it into the renovations of this property. It's a gorgeous home that now has 8 affordable housing units at 60% of median income or less in that building. So there were 15 properties in these blocks that we still currently have as rental properties. We've renovated 3, we sold them to first-time home buyers. But I again want to interject here. You got to keep getting people together. We're always doing stuff with our folks, having cookouts. This is National Night Out, and developing relationships, because we like to think of ourselves as more than just landlords, and we got to have fun doing it too. So otherwise, we wouldn't be the YMCA if we weren't having fun, right? Right, Jamie? Yeah, I know I'd get a thumbs up over there. So then we moved to probably what was our most difficult project, the Salem Square neighborhood, which is on the west side of Newark, the 600 block of West Princess Street, which we developed a plan of attack. We acquired 18 blighted properties. These were all boarded up, the shells. We tore these down through this is a home ownership project, and then built 5 beautiful townhomes there as a part of the project. But a lot of what I suspect that Harrisburg needs, and that York certainly needs, is that, you know, you can put new construction in a lot of places, but to revitalize neighborhoods, you got to do some of the tough projects, is going in and doing rehabs of old properties, which is what we did as well in these neighborhoods. But some of the key things, though, you got places like Gus's Bar here. There were 671 police calls to this corner in a 4-year period. One of the worst dive bars in York. We had to get Gus out of the neighborhood, and he did leave. We renovated this building. Now we have a library, a neighborhood library, part of the Martin Memorial Library system here in the front. 2 beautiful apartments above, and back around the corner is the community policing station. Back up one. Right across the street from the YMCA, this is what I was talking about before, from the red brick down to the left. Those were the worst sources of the source of drugs and prostitution right across the street from our YMCA building. And this was going on for years, and we could never get the owner of those buildings, one guy, to sell to us, but we finally did. He finally sold them to us. I'm sure we overpaid, like you have to a lot of times in these kinds of situations. And so we were able to sell one property, the brick property, to a first-time home buyer. And then the property to the left we still rent to this day, and they're gorgeous apartment units that we used some state programs to renovate. And this backyard, we totally did the front and the back and all the inside, but this was, when we acquired it, the weeds were as tall as I am, filled with trash, and we cleaned it all up and made a beautiful space for the residents. And then our last project that we just did is there was a big, huge vacant lot at the corner of College and George in downtown Newark. There was one store. The Green Food Market was on that property, owned and operated by a Korean family, the Na family. And so we put together a project to build them a store, keep them there, and also in their contract, you saw the fresh fruits and vegetables. It's one of the only places in Newark where you can actually buy fresh fruits and vegetables in the city that's within walking distance of many of the homes. And so we built the Green Food Market for them, as well as 28 townhomes. You can see them down to the back, and then the next one, this is on the inside, gorgeous townhomes right 2 blocks from the center square of York. All at 60%, back up one, 60% of median income or less. This is a community room that we built on site where we do supportive services for folks, and they could also use the space. Anybody that lives there can use the space for birthday parties and family reunions and whatever. But we have an office there as well. And then this building, the big bank building on the corner there by the YMCA, we've also done a lot with. At one time it was our racquetball courts, then it became a baseball academy, and now it's being rented from us by a group that wants to start a robotics school, training school. And then our this building, I just got a contract, sold it today. Well, I got a contract on it today. It was donated to the YMCA. The Y is back behind there. And this is the other thing. If you can find somebody who's willing to invest, no need to do it all yourselves. Now, we were going to do our own project, and a very reputable investor came and said, hey, I'd like to renovate that building, and I'll pay you for it. And it's more than anybody had ever offered to us before. He's going to renovate the first floor, commercial space, an apartment on the second floor, and he's going to have his own personal residence on the third floor. So you don't have to do it yourself if you've got willing partners. And so it's an inside-out process. You need to get the neighborhoods involved all the way through. The internal capacity of community needs to be developed before outside sources are leveraged. If you don't do it in that direction, people are going to say, well, who are you? You know, why are you coming into my neighborhood? Folks need to get involved and feel a part of the process from the very beginning. And so the outside resources, like, you know, the NPP and Federal Home Loan Bank and PHFA and all the sources that we use, but if we just go in and start doing all this stuff without the neighborhood's buy-in, then it really doesn't mean as much. It doesn't mean as much to them as we move forward together. And I always throw this slide in there just to show, you know, who we doing this for. You know, we're doing it for the kids, we're doing it for the neighborhoods, This is one of our Latino dance groups at our historic Fairmount project. Great group of kids. So here's what we've achieved since 1998. 120 SROs. Those are each different projects that we've done for a total investment of about $30 million since 1998. Some key challenges, time and funds. We had to create within the YMCA an entire different structure for us to be able to handle all this. And it's very costly. There's a lot of unknowns. These projects, particularly when you do a lot of rehab work, can be very risky. And you've got to have a plan for sustainability over a long period of time. So, but it's exciting. You form partnerships, and you deepen those partnerships. And again, you have to remember you can't just build it. If you build it, they'll come. But then if you don't do something about the social capital that you're investing in, it'll just go back to where it was 20 years ago. So you have to keep all that in mind. We've helped form through this the West of Fedoris group, which it's a neighborhood organization as well as a business district all around the YMCA. Not for the faint of heart. You got to persevere over time. You got to have a shared vision. I just started listing the countries. You can go to the next one too. This is like over 40 countries of people who are born in other countries who come to the Y, live in our housing, and I suspect it's the same way here in Harrisburg. But you've got people from all over the world who are in your neighborhoods, and a whole nother presentation that for next time we started a New American Welcome Center.
Oh,
that helps us
okay.
an integration program. But I keep this on my wall. We must create neighborhoods in which families feel a sense of belonging. And that's kind of my mantra. I thank you. There's my information.
I enjoyed him.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. That was inspiring. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open it up for questions from council members directed to anyone who has presented, any of the groups. If people wouldn't mind coming up to answer the questions at the microphone, that would be helpful because we're recording tonight's presentation. Also, we'll make sure to put the PowerPoints on the website and gather all the information for tonight to make it accessible for residents. But I'm going to hand it back to Councilwoman Bowers, and hopefully we can take advantage of all the people that are here. After that, we will open it up for questions from the floor and perhaps share some experiences of what's happening in Harrisburg as well.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank all of our presenters for their inspiring presentation this evening. I hope that everyone learned something new from them. So I'll begin with questions. Start with my far right. Councilwoman Daniels, do you have anything for anyone?
So thank you all for your presentations. I think most of my questions are geared to the Lancaster group. Where are
They're still here.
Sure.
Yeah. So what is your relationship? Because Lancaster County has a community development foundation, right? So do you work with them? Do you have a relationship with them? And what is that?
The great thing that we've been able to do is cultivate relationships. We don't look at ourselves as if we're in competition with each other. I think we bring the best of ourselves, and part of that is really communicating about the vision for the community as a whole. Sometimes we are the runners of that idea, and sometimes we take a step back, hence the word partnership in our word. In our title. So Shelby, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
So with the Community Action Partnership of Lancaster County, is that what you were thinking of, or the Lancaster City Alliance?
The Development Foundation.
Lancaster County Community Foundation.
Yeah, the
Oh,
Lancaster.
okay.
Yeah.
And they have funded some of our projects.
Yes, I
in
wanted
the
to know
past.
what that relationship is like how much money do you get from them, and about how many loans do you make per year?
The relationship is very project specific with the community foundation
And as far as the loans are concerned, I just started with Lyft, maybe a year, less than a year ago. We started really slow in 2013, 15 with our first project, which was the one that was showcased, where the property with impact mission was done and rehabbed. So we've always been doing this, and it's been 1 or 2 or 3 a year, nothing on a grand scale. But what we were able to determine, and it didn't come up on the slide, was since our involvement and repping up the program, the LIFT program, for Impact and SAC alone, we've done 40 properties, or it's going to be 40 properties very shortly. So that's just with 2 agencies. I'm not sure of all the numbers. I wish I had them all, I could just slip them right out. But what we are seeing is that, for Paxton Place alone, we're having, 37 units. We have another project in downtown Lancaster, there's 10 units. We have 3 units in Newark that we're doing. So it's getting up there as far as the type of impact we're having. Yeah. It's getting close to the 100 as far as overall units that we are supplying. I don't want to forget that we are deed restricted, so they have to be maintained affordable for 15 years. That's really critical for us. So it's not just doing the project, they have to be maintained affordable for 15 years. That's part of the relationship. We're giving you low-cost dollars to make it work, and we want those units to stay affordable for 15 years.
So, but I guess my question is, how much are you loaning out each year, and where is your money to loan out? Where does that come from?
Well, some of the investors that you saw there, we raised capital through private and public funding, and you saw that some of the banks that were listed on the PowerPoint, which we'll hand out, that you can keep. And then also, what was the other part of the question? I got sidetracked here. We're a $6 million loan fund right now, and 60% deployed, and we continue to raise capital to put back on the street.
And then as people pay back, you're just
Yeah, it is a revolving loan fund. Before I started, we were doing really way more past 5-year terms. I'm a commercial lender for 30 years practically, so I said we need to be really conscious of the money that we're putting out there, for how long are we making it affordable. We want to make sure that we're revolving this as quickly as possible so everybody gets a piece of the pie and the projects can grow.
And then you're lending exclusively to nonprofits, or do you?
No, we do nonprofits, we do public sector, we do, the Hilliards are 2 brothers that are investors. So we could do one investor, we could do multiple investors, we could do nonprofit to nonprofits. It's a mixed bag.
Do you do, let's say, a person buying their own home?
That's through our first-time home buyers program. That's our closing cost assistance. We are not looking for permanent mortgage financing for a first-time home buyer that's buying a 30-year mortgage. Although we might support someone that's doing that work, we're not going to hold a mortgage for 30 years. We don't have that product yet, but you never know.
And what are you?
Don't tell Ray I said that.
Are you a bank, or are you? What is your?
We are a CDFI. We're a financial development financial institution, and so we are chartered to be able to do this work. We can do the work that traditional banks can't do with their restrictions. So we look like a bank, but we have the flexibility of that the bank doesn't have to do the projects.
Do you, this might be ridiculous. How many of those entities would you say are in the region?
There is a handful of CDFIs. You may know one of them already. I'll just throw it out there because you may already have a relationship with them. I used to actually work for them. Community First Fund is a CDFI. There's one in the western area, Saxon Hill. There's 2 or 3 in Philadelphia. So there's only a handful, I think maybe 5 or 6 at best.
In the region?
He's shaking his head. Yeah, they're in Pennsylvania, yes.
My questions on that side, because that is fascinating. Thank you.
Anyone? Thank you. Councilman Majors.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your presentations. I guess either for Lancaster or the YMCA, a lot of this is folks as nonprofits reaching out and having that coordination with banks to be able to get some of the financial products so that they can, the money so that they can, do this work, since you do partner with a lot of banks. What, if any, involvement are you having with local government to ensure that these are, that the neighborhoods that you're looking at are places that are in need of the additional investment?
So, one of the things that, and I'm not sure exactly how it is here in Harrisburg, but in Newark, I'm sure that you have an annual allocation of federal home dollars and CDBG dollars. And so what Newark was always did for us was to look at our projects and see if the federal home dollars met if our projects met the criteria that was set forth by federal home program, and then CDBG, which was a lot more flexible to do a lot of the pre-development work, the acquisition of properties prior to receiving the home dollars. But they, we generally, in all of our projects, there was somebody from the city in planning meetings and in construction meetings, generally a representative always present. We never really used a lot of loans. We generally relied on the city to provide the pre-development, the acquisition dollars, and then worked hand in hand with the RDA to acquire the properties and hold them until we were ready to do the projects.
Okay.
Does that help?
That helps some. So, and on average, how long were you holding properties before you were able to put together financing?
So sometimes it might take a year, 18 months prior to the project being approved by PHFA if we were doing a tax credit project. So sometimes it can be a long period of time. Now, there's a couple of different methods that you can use. You can, generally, if there are people living in the buildings that you're acquiring to do a project in, the Federal Relocation Act comes into effect. And you have to take that into account when you do the project. But what we've done is a lot of people like the neighborhood that they want to live in, but their homes are renovated. We move them out, and then they want to come back.
Okay.
And so, but you have to do all that in the planning process. But we never have had to borrow money to do the projects.
Okay. All right. And well, I guess there's no one from any of the lending institutions, but I know that there's been discussion about making changes to CRA. I know there's proposals at the federal level. It seems like there's a lot more interest in doing this now, so I'm trying to see how any potential changes to the CRA at the federal level would impact the work that you all do. Is it additional money you think would come in?
Well, the tax credit projects, and there may be somebody here who can address this better than me, but the tax credit projects, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, or if you're using DCD, NPP dollars, for the tax credits, the banks are generally the ones who participate to get the CRA credits by acquiring the tax credits. And so I don't know if that would change or not, but they're generally the ones who are the biggest investors in the tax credits.
Okay. All right. I may have a couple other questions. I'm just still formulating it. Everybody's presentations were great, so thank you.
Thank you. President Williams?
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. I just want to say thank you to all of you this evening. The information that you provided this evening will certainly be helpful as we move forward to do a housing program here in the city of Harrisburg. So I say thank you to all of you. One of the questions that I was going to ask, is there an incentive that you give to developers? Like, I know he said something about the tax credit, but is there any other type of incentives like the letter program or anything? Is there any type of incentive that you give, like the LERTA program? Like you talked about the tax credit for tax abatement.
Yeah. Yes, in the home ownership projects, the LERTA program has come into effect, as well as in some of the commercial spaces that we've developed. And so the new construction that I showed you, that's all in the LORTA program.
Okay. This is for the young ladies from Lancaster. You talked about the house-to-home program. You give the individual 6 months to get the house together. What action do they have to do as far as within the 6-month period?
Acquisition and the rehab component. So what we do is we'll fund the part of the acquisition, and we'll actually give them dollars to start the project, and then there'll be 2 additional draws after that. We monitor them. We release the funds as we do walkthroughs on the project to make sure they're on target. And then we'll support them in any other capacity, technical assistance. The example I gave with impact missions is we spent about 2 to 3 years with technical assistance with them to make sure they understood how to turn these properties around. So if we have a new investor, we'll do some technical assistance as well and assist them in any which way we need to make sure that they're turning those properties around.
Okay. So how do you get them to sustain those and be independent from year to year? Do you work with them? Do you go back and ask if there's any problems? How do you get them to sustain those properties since they are low income?
Okay, you mean for the individual that's purchasing the property? Since we have the housing side of what we do, individuals, we reach out to them to make sure that if there are any tools. We have post-closing classes that we offer as well. So we are always trying to do touches with our clients on the other side to make sure that they have the tools available at their disposal. So it's really about sustainability for the long term.
Because I know sometimes with the CBDG money, we ask some of the nonprofits how they're going to be sustainable. Can they be self-independent? If we give them the funding for the 1 or 2 years, what are you going to do? What objective plan?
It depends on who we're talking about, the audience. If we're working with a developer, we're constantly looking at their performance, where they're at, what they need to do to be sustainable for not just for that particular project, but overall, if they're doing the good work. So I often sit down with investors to make sure that I'm looking at their bottom line and if they're cash flowing, not just for that particular project. And I give them the tools. This is what a bank is looking for. This is what you should be looking for. So we're giving them the tools so that they could utilize them, even if they're doing one project with us, but that they have the tools at hand so that they can be sustainable and do this work, not just for that project, but for the long haul. As far as for the housing side, again, we have classes that we offer our clientele that are first-time home buyers, even after they're in the home, that they can continue to have the resources available to them for sustainability.
Okay, thank you.
You are.
That's all I have, Ms. Bowers.
Thank you. Councilman Madsen?
Yes, thank you for all your great presentations. It's very informative and helpful. My first question is for Mr. Wolf. So you showed a lot of really good examples of some rehabilitation projects you did. What determined your sites, and can you walk through the process of what made you pick the sites that you did?
How did we pick the sites?
Yeah.
The first site was just right adjacent to the YMCA, so it made a lot of sense. The second site was near our building, still in our very much our direct service neighborhood. It was actually the city of Newark that came to us because of our success with our first project adjacent to the building and said, would you do this? And it was close enough to us that we felt that it was doable. The Salem Square project, the home ownership project, was also suggested to us by the city, as well as the George Street Commons, the new construction downtown. In every single case except the first one, it was the city of Newark that came to us and asked us to do our research and see, and it was close enough to where our facility was that we felt it was a viable project for us to do.
Do you have any best practices from engaging Newark in that process, or the city? Do you think was there a site that they picked that you felt maybe wasn't a great site for any reason?
The hindsight, some of them was a lot more difficult than we'd ever imagined. But we were there to help and to serve, and we said we'll do our best at it. So I don't particularly have any best practices other than, you know, you really need to examine the type of project that you do. Is this neighborhood going to be good? Is a homeownership project going to work here? Should we do a rental project? Is there, do you do a mix? I mean, you need to examine the type of project that you're going to do more than anything, because a lot of the neighborhoods are going to need it, but, you know, you really need to figure out the type of project that you want to do, I think.
Okay.
Something that would be wise.
So what was the most difficult thing, or why was it so difficult for some of the more difficult ones?
Most difficult?
Yeah, so you mentioned that there were some of the sites were a bit more difficult than others. What made them so difficult?
The perception of the perception of the neighborhood, you know, you're in Newark and people say, I was a 600 block of West Princess, and they grab their heads and they shake it and say, no, you know, it's not happening there. No, I don't want to move there. Well, so that's where we built homes that we were trying to sell. And it was very difficult to do so. Now we actually ended up, we sold 4 of the 13. Then for years we couldn't sell any, but so we ended up renting them. But now there's a reinvestment in the neighborhood by some other parties, mostly the city. The city provided the funds for the Gus's Bar renovation and the library. So now 10 years later, we're trying to sell these houses again, and it's being successful, but it was very, very difficult because of the perception of what that neighborhood is. And that's why you have to battle it with more than just renovating the houses, because we did it. We did a beautiful project, and all these beautiful houses sitting in the 600 block of West Princess, but we maybe at the time didn't do enough to change the perception of what was happening in the neighborhood. And 10 years later, we're kind of getting it right.
Yeah. I see some similarities from what we've been doing with our Mulder Square project, because that's a great project that's been revitalizing that neighborhood, but I don't know if you're familiar with it, but some folks in the community see it as a gentrification project, and it's not that, but that's something that I've noticed in terms of... Anyway, my last, just kind of a point, it seems that York and Lancaster used a lot of public-private partnerships, essentially, to start their affordable housing pieces. I guess my curiosity would be, what does the zoning code look like in Lancaster and York compared to Harrisburg, and do they have some kind of, I don't know if anybody has, I'm throwing this out the room, if their zoning in York and Lancaster is more friendly towards affordable housing development? Does anybody know?
We haven't done that analysis.
Okay, I'd be curious to take a look.
Maybe we could phrase it, perhaps that if we could go full circle. So the City Council is considering adopting some sort of inclusionary zoning ordinance. In your estimations, do you think that would be a wise thing to do? And do you have any suggestions for how that should be formed? And maybe, I didn't mean to jump in, but to involve the students, I know that you all said that your methodological criteria in part was to evaluate whether or not those programs were actually being successful in Annapolis and Albany. Did you reach that conclusion? Can you speak to that?
Can I speak?
If you come to the microphone.
Can I make a comment? That maybe you should take my Penn State hat and put my Harrisburg hat on. Inclusionary zoning is a very good idea to fix a very serious problem that Harrisburg doesn't have. We saw the video that you put there. The cities were Seattle, Denver, cities that my friend who used to make 17 per hour over there now makes 25, but the rent went from 900 to 2,500. That's a problem that Seattle has that we don't have, that Denver have that we don't have. So I like to use it, but it's the wrong idea to use for Harrisburg. It's something that has nothing to do with Harrisburg. We're actually on the other side of the spectrum. And again, this is not Penn State opinion. This is not the research state. This is my personal opinion as a resident of the city. We're on the other side of the spectrum of Seattle and Denver. Every year, we have 200 to 400 houses sold for pennies. And the ladies in here mentioned the problem. When you buy these houses, you paint them, you do whatever job, and sell them, rent them. renting for 2-3 people to live in it, where the house was designed for one single family. Now we have 5-6 mailboxes outside, more trash, more traffic, more issues that caused by those people. And the problem is, the number doesn't change. Every year for the last 10 years, if we look at how many houses we sold in that sales tax auction, it's the same number, 200, 300, 300, 200. It doesn't change. So we're not fixing the problem by selling these houses. We have to do something like that to prevent the problem from keep happening. That's just my personal opinion. Go ahead.
Oh, no, so.
I'm sorry. I respect your opinion, but
Yeah,
I think that there are some statistics. I think you were the statistics person. The statistics say 41% of the rental market in Harrisburg is market rate. And
Is
then
what, sorry?
Market rate.
Market rate.
And then 40% roughly, almost 41% is subsidized or lowered.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
The middle, affordable housing section is a small percentage, so less than 20%. And so as, bear with me here.
Excuse me, Mr.
I'm sorry.
Can you come to the mic because we're
I just
recording?
didn't want to.
And I don't want to echo it.
Right, and also,
I'm sorry, Chair.
and also
Chair
we'll
Bowers.
need, yeah, and also we'll need your
I
name
was
for the
trying to get your
record.
attention to have him,
That's fine.
Yeah, we'll need your name for the record and everything.
yes, because we need this, since he's recording this.
Yeah. Thank you.
My name's Singwar Mans. I'm the Chief Executive Officer with the Housing Authority, the Harrisburg Housing Authority. So one of the challenges is going to be, if we look at Seattle, Denver, some of those other cities that you'd mentioned, and we've already agreed that as you looked at the PowerPoint display or the video, that they didn't plan accordingly. So gentrification has been this issue now with extreme housing prices, cost burdens, that they didn't prepare for. And so I think what we're trying to do now is think of policies. I think your null hypothesis asks the question, does housing policy impact positively development? Does housing policies positively impact investment? Yes or no, right? And so I think the question probably is answered by saying, yes, housing policy does. That's what an inclusionary policy is. And so if you have a small percentage of affordable housing as a market share, and you know that it's going to grow because the housing market in Harrisburg is going to improve like Seattle, like Denver, then you don't want to end up fighting this retroactively or after the fact. And so I understand your point as a Harrisburg resident, but I think that there needs to be a lot of contemplation as it relates to these kinds of policies and how it might ultimately help affordable housing. And I am biased.
And
So.
I have to also interject that we really haven't had a discussion about what short-term rentals are doing to our local market, because we know that a lot of the affordable housing issue is impacted by those short-term, is it short-term rentals? Is that what you call, like the Airbnb and the couch surfing? In San Francisco, Seattle, all of those places, that's really shutting out a lot of the middle-income people from being able to be homeowners or home renters, because you're narrowing the pool of landlords.
Right.
And a lot of people are using those services instead of landlords if they can afford those services. So I think part of the discussion too is, you know, how are those numbers looking when we take, like those affordable numbers looking if we take into account our couch surfings and Airbnb numbers and all of that, because we are growing significantly. I don't know what the tax income was this year from those rentals, but I'm sure significantly more than from last year, and they just keep growing. So I think that's part of the discussion. I don't think it, you know, when I think the apartment I first rented in Harrisburg is more than twice what it was when I came. I came here 13 years ago, and I know incomes that have not gone up more than twice. So I know that folks are being pressured into sharing more people sharing apartments, more people living with relatives, more people piecing together all sorts of housing options because the wages have not gone up with the cost of rental.
Is the apartment that you rented going twice in size too? That's why I went
It's the
twice
same
in
size. It's the same apartment.
Because I have 5 houses in Harrisburg, and I still rent the same price since 2013. Never went up. 700 to 750.
Yeah, I was giving an example
Yeah,
of my
just saying.
apartment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Sorry, one comment. I guess moving forward is if we were to continue to work on this project, I think that's the thing to look at is zoning compared to York and Lancaster and how we could learn from that, or maybe engage the Pennsylvania Municipal League to look at various models throughout the Commonwealth.
Well, this is going on without inclusionary zoning in York and Lancaster. This is, I would guess, example of incentive-based public-private partnerships, federal state funding. This is sort of an alternative model, although maybe they could coexist. Do either of you have any opinion on whether or not inclusionary zoning in Lancaster or York would be complementary and beneficial to your effort?
I'll just say quickly, what we're really trying to advocate for is just more housing in general, not necessarily even affordable or what people consider or what their definition of affordable is, because we have a 2% vacancy rate, which is means it's 0 in Lancaster. And so housing of any price points would start to create more of a continuum. We're seeing, similar to your story, units that were renting for $500 a couple years ago are $900 now, just because there's such we have no inventory. So we're really advocating for housing of all price points. And the other thing that we're seeing is we have empty nesters competing with people coming out of college. But in the county, we're still continuing to really favor building single-family homes, we did a housing study in 2013, which predicted that this was going to happen. And unfortunately, it's continued. So we have a Places 2040 plan out of our Lancaster County Planning Commission that's really helping us advocate for more types of housing. So we just feel like if we can get more housing, hopefully things will come back into balance. I hope that sort of answers the question. Yeah, sure.
And the other thing is to really try to incentivize the landlords that are doing the right thing, just naturally. So we just helped fund someone in the Sowe area that had about 13 properties, and they were extremely affordable. They were at 80% of the median. Naturally happening, quality housing I would want to live in. And so when there is individuals that are doing that work, we want to incentivize them by giving them the products that they need to continue to do that work through the House of Home program.
And this is just a generic comment, not a question, but one of the things that's fascinating to me is that rents have gone up, and that does not necessarily mean that the quality of the housing goes up. So we have 2 markets, kind of the market of renters that don't have credit, so they resort to high-rent slumlords, or renters who do have good credit, and then they can get into, the same rent but better housing landlords. So there's this. So you would think, I don't know. It used to be that if someone was a slumlord, their rent was cheaper, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Yeah, I don't know. So that was just my comment. Sorry.
Mr. Majors wants to say.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a lot of questions, but we'll leave it to Councilwoman Green.
Okay. Thank you. Councilwoman Green, do you have any
Thank you,
questions?
Ms. Bowers. A lot of my questions have been answered, but I think this one is kind of towards the Lancaster group. When you're doing the projects, are you focusing more on mixed income housing or dedicated low income housing projects, or do you not have a preference, just whoever applies?
We're always looking at the marketing mix. We're not trying to concentrate in one specific area, because that's not how our communities work. So we need to be able to really focus on both and make sure that our funding is really balancing out the communities that we serve. So we are always constantly looking at our product line, and if we're heavy on one area versus another. That's a conversation we have once a month. Are we having concentration?
All right, and then also, for your loan program, is there a minimum loan that they must take?
I don't know the lowest that we've ever done, but I know that I'm looking at one right now that's about $37,000. And so it's really the need of the individual. Is it for rehab? Is it rehab resale? What is it that they need those funds for? They may have the capital to acquire, but they don't have the funds to complete the project. So we're not going to limit what we think they need. They can come as small as possible. The same analysis goes into the project, so it doesn't matter how small it is or how grand it is.
All right, and then just one last question for you. I know you said in the beginning that one of your first lenders kind of needed some more management services along with it. Do you find that as people are still applying that they still need management services? And if so, have you built in any systems in place to help address that?
So we're still growing that program, so it's very easily to manage. We're actually looking at bringing on another lender to help support the growth of what we're doing. So there's no time limit as of this time that we'll say we'll only work with you for 2 years or 2 months. We've been working for Impact Missions for the better part of 5 years in total. And so I don't want to say it's indefinite, but for right now, we haven't put a time limit on the resources that we offer. We do expect at some point, though, that they'll be bankable, and that is naturally the process that we want to get them to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm going to make a statement. Can I
Yes.
My statement is to the gentleman in the back. You indicated to the mayor that you don't believe in having a policy that addresses inclusionary housing. I disagree with you, because gentrification is certainly here in the city of Harrisburg. And you said you've lived here. If you don't see it, I don't know why not. And all I see is that improving the housing structure in the buildings and the homes here, and it's directed towards the middle class and upper class, and certainly not to those less fortunate. So we certainly need a policy that addresses inclusionary housing.
I respect your opinion, but we have so many vacancies, more than any other cities around us.
And
We have more.
And there's reasons for those vacancies.
That's what we have to fix. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what we have to
But we
fix.
don't fix it by individual developers coming in and renovating buildings and not addressing the issues.
No,
of
we don't
those
have to
who are
do. We don't have to
low
get big
income, who need to
investors,
be
but we
living
can
in
do what
those-
they do. We can do what they do
Right.
and get to help those people that cannot afford. I rented a house. I gave the example the other day. I bought a house for $30,000. I rented to a lady. In 4 years, she paid it off to me. $750 every month, four and something. She paid it off to me. I went to her. I said, "Why couldn't you buy the house? If you bought the house, you could get mortgage for like $30,000. I mean, for 30 years, for less than what you paid for rent for me." She cannot do that, and that's what I'm trying to say. We need to help people own the houses, more landlords, more homeowners versus rentals.
And certainly we do
That's-
that.
that's
And
what I'm
I
trying
said
to say,
Certainly
yeah.
there's several programs here,
And-
many programs that addresses training for those individuals.
And the
that repairs their credit, that gives them the training about how to purchase a home, and even afterwards, where she said a post-closing. But in the interim, do we leave those individuals who cannot afford it, have an opportunity to live in those renovated structures?
You never leave those people. We have more low income, according to the study that the city did. I didn't do the study, the city did. We have more affordable housing than any other city around us. We have more low income housing than any other city next to us or even around us. If you compare us to Seattle, you won't be able to rent over there. The day you post the house for rent is gone. In here, you walk around Elson Hill, and I live in Elson Hill, and between every other house, you'll find rental, room for rent, available for rent, every other place. That's the problem that we don't have yet. It's okay to think about it, but we don't have it yet. Our problem now is vacancy. We have 200, 300, 400 houses,
You keep comparing
vacancies.
us to populations, 98,000, medium income.
No, it wasn't me. It wasn't me.
Listen, I'm
the
just saying, well, okay, but you made the statement, so I'm going to make a statement as well. Median income, $47,000.
And what's-
Median income here is not that,
And what's the median houses prices in Harrisburg?
32, 33.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
The house. And you said the median income is 40,000.
In
That's.
Seattle, with the population 2 times more than Harrisburg.
I'm not comparing Seattle.
Homes,
The mayor did.
331,000.
The mayor did.
I think our goal for tonight was not to really engage in debate, but rather to share experiences,
Okay, but I'm
exchange
sharing the
information.
experience because I've been
No, I know. It's fine. I'm just
adamant
saying.
about
yeah,
doing
yeah.
inclusionary housing when individuals come, developers come in here and develop properties and not think about the lower income. It's directed toward middle class and upper class. We have yes, a high percentage of low income, but take in consideration your senior citizens. Most of them can't afford to keep their homes, so what they do is they go in a senior citizens building or housing structure. So a house becomes vacant, children don't take care of that home, next thing you know, we have a blighted area. What I'm saying to him is, though, are you going to continue to come here as developers and continue to develop homes, buildings, apartments, townhouses, and not think about the low, medium income?
Oh, I don't disagree. I just think the goal is for us to exchange ideas so that we can help craft a
Well, Mayor, I'm
policy
glad
which
that you are
addresses
doing
those.
that, because when Mr. Jones
Yeah.
sat here and he developed 4 or 5 of those buildings in this city of Harrisburg, you kept your head down and didn't say a word.
Okay.
Okay.
Back
Well,
to you, Councilwoman
I did
Bowers.
have one question regarding, I think all of the presenters mentioned the importance of educating the residents, whether that be leading them toward home ownership and maintaining the home, or how to be an engaged renter. So I just was curious to know if that's something that is directly addressed through both of your groups, or is that something that the city could assist with or has assisted with in sharing that information?
I mean, I'll just say, yeah, I mean, 30 years ago, you know, people are still operating under, you know, an assumption that maybe how their parents bought homes. And now, you know, Miriam does a great job of like talking to people about credit scores and really, you know, once your credit is in order, you know, for as little as $1,000 and then combining some programs, you can get into home ownership. So I think that's one of the things that we really do is kind of let the community know that like the dream of home ownership, if that is your dream, that's not everyone's dream. Certainly a lot of millennials are not interested in owning homes, and that's fine. But, you know, giving them sort of that information. And then we do also, we're starting a rental advantage course, again, for those millennials who just want to be good renters and want to cultivate good relationships with their landlords. So I'm not sure who kind of does that in Harrisburg, but yeah, we work in tandem with our city government in terms of, you know, we make sure that the housing that we're providing loans for is in good condition. There's a lot that goes into that to make sure we're not putting someone into a home they can't afford in the long term, and also is going to be expensive to maintain. Did that answer the question, or, okay?
Yes, thank you. Did you?
The only thing I would add to that through the program that Adrian Garcia is developing, it is an educational component to it.
Okay.
Because we understand that not everyone's going to be a homeowner. So we want to make sure that they're best tenant they can be, that they have their financials in order so that they have sustainability within their household, their nucleus, their unit, that if they decide to move somewhere else, they have options available to them, regardless of their income level.
Okay. Thank you.
We use groups like LHOP, and they now have a YHOP in Newark, an office in Newark, to refer people to. The Community Progress Council has also done some things, but one of for the homeownership education piece, we use them. But we also, you know, the banks have, as a part of their CRA obligations, generally have financial literacy and financial education classes. We use those. We organize with different banks and offer them to all of our residents. Okay. So there are a number of different resources that are already in existence so that maybe the city doesn't have to create something that's already out there.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Do any other council members have any additional questions before we open it up for public comment?
I guess my question would be just next steps. I think there's a couple of groups or entities that we probably might want to have a conversation with and see if we can do some kind of, if it's a public-private partnership we're looking to do, particularly impact Harrisburg and potentially bring in the county. They have the gaming monies, as we're aware of. So just seeing, oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. So I think there's a couple of entities I'd like to bring to the table to see if we can do some coalition building, particularly impact Harrisburg, the county, because they have the community and development, the gaming money, excuse me. And then we can maybe see what we can do with matching CDBG funds and then find out what entity we do this through as a nonprofit. That'd be my suggestion. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. At this time, we will open up for public comment. Is anyone to my far right if you could please come to the mic?
I'll keep this real brief, but my name is Pam Auer. I work for the Center for Independent Living of Central PA. I am just outside the city line now where I live, but when I first moved here to Harrisburg, my husband and I both have physical disabilities. We needed accessible housing. We had to move out of the city because we couldn't find anything that was in our price range and accessible. That was going back 20 years now. Before we moved out of the city, we actually lived in the apartment buildings, PA place, for 2 years, way out of our price range, but we made it happen until we found a place that we could have built to our needs. But I'm not hearing anything changing in the city of Harrisburg in terms of access for people with disabilities of whatever income. Our community has the highest unemployment rate, people with disabilities, unfortunately, because people aren't seeing the benefit of hiring people with disabilities. But then you add to our income, how do we afford housing? So we are in the low income, can't find accessible. And so I came late, and I'm sorry, I came late, so I didn't hear all the discussions, but I didn't hear any of what I was here. What is accessible? What units are they doing? What are the percentages? Are they staying to the 5%? Or are they not mandated because maybe it's not federal funds? What's being done for accessible housing for people with disabilities in the city of Harrisburg? That's what I'd like to know. Or Newark.
I don't have a direct answer, but thank you for bringing that to our attention. I think that I said I do not have a direct answer. I'm happy to speak with you or anyone relative to the issue. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, and I apologize we didn't include that in our discussion today, but it's certainly something that I think everyone has a strong concern.
One solution is what we've been asking for a long time for the city of Harrisburg.
Mhm.
Get a committee for people with disabilities so we can advise you on this stuff. We've been asking for that for several years now. Whether it be city council or with you, mayor, we've asked Mayor Pepperfuss to have a committee that can advise you all on access issues on the needs of people with disabilities in Harrisburg. Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude.
No. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was my understanding that the funds raised through land banks were supposed to go to help develop more accessible units. Am I remembering that correctly or incorrectly?
Is there a percentage? I know that some of the TBRAs, some of those have a specific, if they get tax incentives, they get a certain we can say what percentage are going to be accessible, but I didn't hear anybody discuss that.
No, there was no discussion. Because what is the status of our land bank? What are we doing with it?
I can't answer that at the moment.
Yeah, because I thought a portion of the purpose of the land banks were to help facilitate the development of accessible housing. So if that's failing, if that portion is failing, then the money to help make that happen is failing too. So it's just, yeah.
So it's set already? What the percentage will be?
I don't remember. I don't remember. This is from like a long time ago, from years ago. But yeah, those are huge issues, and with our building housing stock being so old, it's all about modernizing a lot of them, and yeah. Anyways, that's not very useful, but I think if we wanted to, we could have mechanisms for creating more accessible spaces. I don't know.
Thank you. Anyone in the middle? If you wouldn't mind going to the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, Council and Mr. Mayor. My name is Jen Wintermeyer. I am the Executive Director of Tri-County Community Action, which is your local community action agency. I also sit on the Board of Directors for Tri-County Housing Development Corporation, which is your local CHODO. And I sit on the LIFT Loan Committee for LHOP, and I'm the chair of the Capital Area Coalition on Homelessness, which is a long way to say that I know enough about affordable housing to be dangerous, but not enough to consider myself an expert. What I do think I'm an expert in is understanding the challenges low-income and moderate-income families face as they try to, one, not only survive, but two, get to a place where they're no longer considered low or moderate income, but where they're economically self-sufficient. So I wanted to make a couple of points. First, thank you for thinking about inclusionary practices. I think one of the advantages, and I'm going to say it in my very non-technical way, that the LIFT Loan Fund has is as a committee, we sit down. And even though we have for-profit developers sometimes coming to us and trying to develop market rate projects, we're making them set aside affordable housing units, and in many cases also accessible housing units. Probably not to the scale that's needed, but we are guaranteeing that there's affordable housing for the next 15 years in these high-risk communities. High risk meaning they're high risk for gentrification, because a developer can come in and buy a lot of things really, really cheap and throw some money at it and suddenly prices it out of the market of the neighborhood. I do want to make sure, though, as I'm listening here and as I started getting engaged in this, that we talk about what affordable means. And Sangor, you made a great point of making sure that we understand what affordable means versus what low-income housing or subsidized housing is versus what market rate housing is. There is a very small gap for somebody who is jumping from subsidized housing to market rate. There's not a lot of options out there for them. And that's why this is so important, to make sure that we preserve and widen that gap so that families have the opportunity to get ahead and not just survive. Housing is one of the best ways that folks can build wealth and value and asset and build our city back up. The last point I'll make, and then I'll be done, is that Tri-County Community Action is a housing counseling agency, and we do provide first-time homebuyer education, as well as wraparound supportive services. We also recognize the need. There are an awful lot of folks out there who could probably save money by buying their home, but their credit is not quite where it's at, so we do provide free credit repair counseling. In the past, we have asked the city to help support those activities through CDBG funds. We have not needed to make that ask for the last several years because we've been able to find other ways to support the program. Doesn't mean we'll never ask you in the future, but we're always happy to be a partner with the city, especially as you're thinking creatively about helping families move ahead and helping our neighborhoods rebuild. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up before you sit down? So how would you define affordable, and what is that gap? Because I think that's one of the things that we have to contemplate when developing our policy.
You know, that's a fantastic question, Mayor, and I don't know, again, that I'm the expert to be able to define what that is. I know as I was doing work with the LIFT Loan Committee, we would talk about affordability, and I finally said, what does that mean? And in some cases, depending on if you're talking HUD rules or somebody else's rules, it's maybe 80 to 100% of area median income. Which might sound okay, but if you're building that housing in a neighborhood where the average area median income is only 30%, it's not affordable necessarily to the folks that live there, which is to the gentleman's point of we got to have programs that we lift up individuals so that they can afford those things. So I don't know the answer to that question, but I would say it's an important thing that we define, or you define as you move forward, what you mean by affordable, because depending on who you talk to and what their reference point is, that's a very different number.
Yeah, and that's the point I was going to make earlier was area affordable housing. Also, the area that they may use for Harrisburg is a larger, if you're looking at the GSA or an MSA, you're looking at a larger area. So they don't take into account places like Mechanicsburg, Camp Hill,
sure.
All of our suburban areas outside of the city of Harrisburg, when we know our median income in the city is about $35,000. So what is affordable to the residents that are confined to the city of Harrisburg is a lot different than that larger GSA, quote unquote, affordable housing area.
Absolutely.
So, even with the cities of Lancaster and Newark, you know, how are those areas defined in terms of affordable? Because again, affordable is very subjective, especially in the way that we're talking about it in these large macro senses.
Yeah, and I'll let them answer. I can tell you on the LIFT Loan Committee, we, probably to Miriam's chagrin, we debate this. We debate, is it really affordable to the place where the developer wants it to go? Yeah. And we've pushed developers back a little bit and said it's not affordable enough. So it's absolutely, absolutely something to think about.
So if you guys are doing the pushing on the developers, would you think that it would be advantageous or help you guys in your projects to have an inclusionary housing or zoning in that city, in the cities that you're working with? Or do you think that all that work should just be done from the nonprofit to the developer? I think that's part of the conversation we're having here now. It's what's that balance? Are we as a city and government saying on every project you need to have X? Or is it when we have groups like this that are having these types of development projects that we're just pushing them? Because there's an issue, again, we have a large population, as Mr. Manns mentioned, of low-income housing, and what we all think of as affordable housing and what quality affordable housing looks like is a lot different. I mean, even though we're really just talking about that middle section, but the larger conversation as we're moving forward, all these has to do with a quality affordable housing for everyone.
I agree. In my personal opinion, I won't speak on behalf of the organizations that I represent as a board, but I'll speak on behalf as the Executive Director of Community Action. I think inclusionary policies will complement efforts that are already happening and will allow those efforts to maybe put the stick behind some of the carrots. So personally, I would say that I think it's a smart move to protect our neighborhoods and give families the opportunity to step up.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and it definitely is. We're talking should be more proactive than reactive. So I think, thank you, Councilwoman Bowers, for having. Yep, Mr. Manns. Oh, sure.
Concerning your question about the area median income for the Harrisburg area, it's the same for York. I mean, you know, the median income for York County is not what it is for York City. I mean, it's much higher. But when you're renting to somebody at 50% of median income for York County, you have to know your market, because there's a wide, where you fix your rents is, with the affordable housing projects, there's a pretty wide gap there, where you can rent it at this amount or at this amount, according to 50% of median income for the county. So it's up to the organization and developer to discover, well, it's only affordable if people who are living in the neighborhood can actually afford it. Even though it's within the guidelines to maybe get a higher rent, you can still put it at a lower amount according to the needs of the neighborhood.
I just wanted to add a few things to the conversation. I just think that it'd be illustrative to the points that I think that Jennifer had made. So generally speaking, from an industry standpoint, what we say is acceptable, or what is said is to be acceptable, is that somebody that pays 30% of their annual income in rent, or maybe 35%, whoever you talk to, depending on who you talk to, that's acceptable. Anything above that, your rent burden is considered to be unacceptable, too high, too much of a cost burden. And so when you talk about AMIs, area median incomes, and you talk about whether or not affordable is from 50% AMI up to 100% AMI, it also does depend on what the rents are in the area, right? What the income limits are and what the rents are. So if I make $12,000 a year, and my rent is $6,000 annually, I'm paying 50% of my income into my rent.
Right.
And that is considered to be an unacceptable threshold. And I think that's the issue, really. That's what we're talking about here when we think about market rate rent. And the market rate rent pushes people out of the ability either to afford, or they have to live in a condition, as you had suggested, your rent was doubled, and so therefore you have to jeopardize or forfeit some of those everyday things that we take for granted, such as food and gas and the ability, of course, to do some of those other things like exercise. So that's one of the issues. In Harrisburg, just so that you understand, in Harrisburg, 50% of the renters are over the age of 62. A lot of these renters that are over the age of 62 are on fixed income. And so we have to understand that their income is not going to change. They're not going to have the ability or the flexibility to increase their income. So that's why that discussion is important. As the city begins to grow, as the city becomes really appealing to investors, and those market rate investors come in and they start to develop these nice condominiums, there's going to be a challenge with the city at some point to tackle this issue of affordability. And I think that's why it's an important discussion right now as opposed to later in the game.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions in the middle? Comments? Okay.
Let me give you my card, by the way, because we're developing apartments right now through the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, and we have at least 5% of our apartments are accessible, okay, at least. And we just did, about a year and a half ago, it's public housing, so it's not affordable housing, it's actually subsidized housing. But out of the 159 apartments that we redid, and it's a beautiful Jackson Tower complex, 22 of those units are accessible. Beautiful, beautiful units. So we have to talk.
Great. Are there any questions to my left? Comments? Okay. Well, I'll just share my closing remarks. I'd like to thank everyone. We've truly had some spirited discussion this evening. I appreciate your presence. Thank you again to all of our presenters and supporters that attended this evening. Thank you, Mayor and Ms. Katie Hicks, for your assistance in making my vision come to life. I hope that everyone learned something new this evening, and I hope that council members and the administration can work together, because I think Mr. Wolf said it best when he showed the picture of the dance team. It's about the kids. This is who we're doing it for, to ensure that they have a solid foundation and can survive in a healthy neighborhood and in a promising environment. So I thank my fellow council members for your attendance and participation this evening. Mayor, I don't know if you have any questions before we formally
No, I think
close.
you said it very well. I would welcome members of the community to fill out the inclusionary housing program design worksheet as well, which you can get at the entrance. I think that would be an interesting task. I would welcome the students from Penn State to fill it out as well, based on your experience and others. You can submit those to either City Council or the Mayor's office, and we will gather that information. This is just one point of discussion along the way as we begin to think about the future and planning for the future. So we thank everyone for coming and participating. I also want to thank Katie for helping arrange all the invitations and the PowerPoints and everything else tonight. So I think it was very informative, and thank you for working with us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. This concludes our workshop. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.